Hello, whisperers. Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy tonight's tale, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. It helps more than you know. Now, dim the lights, and let's begin tonight's story. The Blackhawk rattled around me like a metal coffin with rotors. Harness straps dug into my shoulders every time we banked. I had the M240 mounted on its swing arm, one hand resting on the pistol grip, the other on the feed tray cover. Ammo cans stacked at my feet, the smell of gun oil and hydraulic fluid mixing with the taste of dust being sucked in through the open side door. It should have felt routine. Drop in, provide cover, evac civilians. But the radio chatter didn't sound routine. Too many voices breaking over one another. Too many words like containment and outbreak. The pilot shouted over comms that we were approaching the LZ, an apartment block that looked like it had been shelled. Fire licked from broken windows. On the rooftop, maybe 30 people were waving their arms, holding sheets and flashlights. The bird steadied into a hover, and I swung the gun down, scanning. That's when I saw them, not just the survivors, the other shapes boiling out of doorways and stairwells. They moved wrong, too fast, no hesitation. They slammed into the people waiting for us, tearing into them before we'd even sat down. "Open up," crew chief barked in my headset. I squeezed the trigger. The M240 roared, vibrating against its mount, belching fire. Tracers stitched across the rooftop, tearing through bodies. Brass clanged against the deck and spun out into the rotor wash. The smell of cordite filled the cabin. I'd fired this weapon in training, in live fire exercises, against paper silhouettes, sometimes plywood torsos. This was nothing like that. Flesh came apart differently. It sprayed and misted. It refused to drop. I chewed through belts and watched things that had been human keep climbing toward us, with half their faces gone. Someone below waved for me to stop. He thought I was cutting down survivors. Maybe I was. Hard to tell when the screaming blended. Terror, pain, hunger all sounding the same. My gut turned, but I kept the trigger down. If it moved, I cut it in half. The pilot called we were at max hover time. Survivors surged toward the skids, clawing to climb aboard. We were lifting when one man leapt and grabbed the left skid, dangling. Crew chief reached for him, but I froze. His eyes were clouded. Blood ran down his chin. The man jerked, convulsed, and snapped his teeth at the air. The rotor wash whipped spittle across the glass. "Get him off!" someone shouted. The crew chief kicked out, boot connecting with the man's shoulder. He hung on a second longer, growling, then lost grip and tumbled away into the burning street. I didn't breathe again until we were climbing, the rooftop shrinking below into a smear of fire and movement. I looked at the empty belt at my feet. My first run, half a city still below us. Ammo was already going faster than I could count. And the worst part, for everyone I shredded into meat, 10 more came running. We didn't land after that first run. Command kept feeding us coordinates, moving us across the city like we were the last patch of duct tape holding things together. Every block looked worse than the one before. Fires spread without sirens, streets jammed with abandoned cars, bodies that weren't bodies anymore, staggering between wrecks. I'd burned through 3 ammo cans before I realized I was shaking. The trigger finger never rests in this job. You tap, burst, sweep. But I was holding it down too long, riding the gun until the barrel smoked. The crew chief dropped another belt across my lap. "Keep it steady, man." His voice was calm, but his eyes weren't. We banked over a traffic snarl where hundreds of people had tried to escape. They never made it. The convoy looked like a graveyard of minivans and sedans, windshields cracked, doors hanging open, and among the wrecks, they swarmed. "Light it up," pilot ordered. I leaned into the M240, letting tracers pour across the avenue. The rounds chewed through vehicles, blood sprayed like paint, and still they came. One thing hit me hard. The infected didn't scream when they were shot, just kept clawing forward. The only time I heard noise from them was when they were tearing into someone alive. Then it was shrieking, wet, tearing sounds that made me clench my teeth until my jaw hurt. At one point, a knot of them climbed onto a roof and leapt for us. 10, maybe 12 at once, hurling themselves into open air like they thought gravity would cut us down. I ripped the line across them mid-flight. Torsos burst apart, legs separated. One landed close enough that the skid rattled. His arm hooked the frame. The crew chief stomped until it let go, tumbling out of sight. By hour 5, I stopped telling myself they were civilians. That proved true when I saw what they did to the second Blackhawk. We'd been rerouted to cover another bird pinned near a stadium. From above, it looked like a mass evacuation gone wrong. Crowds of survivors funneled toward gates that had jammed shut. And then the noise hit us. Thousands of voices, not human voices, a rolling wave of moaning and clawing. The other Blackhawk was hovering low, gunners blazing into the crowd. I could see their tracers, the flicker of muzzle flash. Then the roof access gave way. Infected poured up like ants and hit the bird from every side. Arms reached into the cabin, the rotors tilted, and then, God help me, I watched them drag that bird down into the mob. Steel bent like it was made of tin. Crew chief's screams cut over our comms before static erased them. I almost froze. Almost. Then instinct dragged me back into the gun. I painted the rooftop with fire, brass spinning out like confetti, zombies ripped apart in fountains of meat. But it didn't matter. The other crew was gone in seconds. "Pull off, pilot shouted. We climbed, the stadium shrinking below us into smoke and red firelight. The gun barrel glowed cherry red. My gloves smelled of cordite and sweat. We didn't even have time to mourn. Command ordered us to the hospital rooftop, refuel, and pick up survivors. I checked my last ammo can, half a belt already spilled out across the deck. As we approached, I could see the horde clawing up the sides of the building, their hands scraping concrete, their bodies stacking against each other like a living ladder. The rooftop doors shook. Something inside was already hammering to get out. "We're touching down," the pilot said, tight in his throat. We were going to land, and everything in me screamed that touching concrete tonight was a mistake. The Blackhawk touched down on the hospital roof with a bone-jarring thud. The rotor washed through dust, papers, and blood-stained sheets into the air. The second the skids hit, the rooftop erupted in chaos. Survivors rushed us like a stampede. They clawed for the doors, eyes wild, some screaming for help, some just screaming. I swung the gun downward, shouting over the headset, but it didn't matter. The rooftop doors burst open behind them. The horde came spilling out, shoving through the crowd like a wave of teeth and nails. The first infected hit the nearest survivor and tore his throat open. The spray caught in the rotor wash, splattering across the side of the bird. My trigger finger didn't even hesitate. I hosed down the rooftop, tracers cutting arcs through flesh, tearing bodies apart until they were nothing but limbs and pulp. But there were too many. Every round I fired ripped apart infected, and the desperate people trying to climb aboard. It didn't matter who I aimed at. The rooftop turned into one writhing, bloody mass. The sound was worse than the gunfire. Screams blended into shrieks. The slap of rotors became background to the wet ripping of teeth sinking into bodies. One of them made it to the cabin. His hand shot through the door, nails scraping across the crew chief's arm. I swung the barrel and fired point blank, the blast filling the bird with hot brass and gore. His arm dropped, shredded to ribbons, still twitching on the deck. The pilot yelled we were overweight. Too many survivors hanging on, pulling themselves up the skids. My belt was almost gone. The M240's barrel glowed, smoke burning my lungs every time I took a breath. Then the rooftop cracked open under the weight of the horde. I swear I saw dozens crawling over each other, climbing the hospital walls like ants, their mouths open, teeth clacking. They threw themselves against the helicopter, smearing blood across the fuselage, clawing for the cabin. I kept firing, one belt, then another. Tracer fire painted the night red. Heads burst like fruit. Torsos folded open. Blood mist sprayed back across the rotors. Every time I blinked, my eyes burned from powder and smoke. A hand grabbed my harness and yanked me back. The crew chief was shouting that we were lifting now. I looked down just as the bird lurched upward. Half a dozen infected still clung to the skids. I leaned out and raked them with fire until the last one lost its grip and dropped into the swarm below. The rooftop fell away, consumed in red. Survivors we hadn't taken were lost under the tide, bodies shredded and torn apart in seconds. Their screams carried even as we climbed higher, until the rotors drowned them out. I sat back, chest heaving, the gun's barrel smoking in front of me. My hands were black with powder and blood. My ears rang from the nonstop roar. We'd escaped, barely. The hospital was gone, the stadium gone, the city itself crawling with the dead. I stared down through the open door as we pulled away, tracer fire still ghosting in my vision. We weren't built for this. I was supposed to fight men, soldiers, combatants who bled and fell when you hit them, not this endless tide that kept coming, no matter how many belts I fed through the gun. We had fuel for maybe another hour, ammo for less. 12 hours since it started. God only knew how many more before the bird finally ran dry. And the dead. got their hands on us, too.